Welcome back to the Chasing Space podcast. This is your host, Brendan Swanwick, joined today by a friend I would consider a mentor, and one of the coolest people that I've met in the space industry so far is Stephen McCall. Stephen, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So just to give you a little bit of a rundown on Stephen's extensive background here, we'll start with his education. He earned a Bachelor's of Science in Aviation Business Administration from Embry-Riddle down to Daytona. Then we had a Master's of Education in Educational Leadership and Administration, and then a postgrad certificate in Legislative Studies from Georgetown. Did I get all that straight?
Yes, you did. Thank you for mentioning Daytona Beach, the best campus in the world.
I know. I've only been to the Prescott campus out in Arizona, so it doesn't have the same aura, but no launch is going off in Prescott. So, Stephen, you started off your career at the United States Department of Defense. You were a chief of the Space Systems branch and also a chief of the Science and Technology branch. Can you tell me a little bit about what that consists of being a chief of these two different branches?
Yes, so during my time in the Department of Defense, I came in as a non-space officer or a non-space professional, and one of my colonels asked me what my dreams were, and I told him that I wanted to be a space professional. However, I failed the color vision test, and that's why I was medically discharged as a second lieutenant from Embry-Riddle. So, long story short, he said, well, we need space people. Why not start a space branch? And he was a space officer. So he sent me off to space school in a non-traditional way. And then shortly thereafter, I became the chief of Space Systems branch. I built that for Air Combat Command from the ground up. We grew to around 13 to 14 people. And then a few years later, around 2015, they had another spot open. Lieutenant Colonel was retiring, and they asked me if I could take over the Science and Technology branch and essentially be the gatekeeper for all industry, CEOs, and vice presidents to come to the 4-star general. So I would look at their technologies, their capabilities, and what they offer to Air Combat Command and the warfighter. And that was the Science and Technology branch, and I led that branch all the way until 2017 when I moved to Washington, D.C.
So a little precursor to your interest in space, and then dipping your toes into what it means to be in the legislative side of space.
Being a space enthusiast goes all the way back to I was a little boy. However, I wasn't sure how I was going to get to space, if I could ever get to space. Unfortunately, or fortunately for me, growing up, I grew up with a disability called Tourette syndrome, also ADHD, also ADD, and also obsessive-compulsive disorder. Long story short, that disqualified me to essentially go to space. So what ended up happening is when I joined the military, I had tried to find different paths to get into a space position. So when all that fell through in 2002 and I was medically discharged from being a second lieutenant at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, that's when I joined the Department of Defense, and literally I had an amazing colonel, and he said, what were your dreams? And I told him I've always wanted to be a space professional. And back in, I think it was 2007, he said, why not? And I said, well, sir, I'm a civilian now. I was a GS-12, I believe. And I said, I don't know how to become one. And he said, well, let's create a branch. He said, we need space professionals. Come up with a plan and go get your training. And that's how I was able to finally, at the age of around 27 years old, start living my life in the space world. And that's how I got into being a space professional now, over 20 years later.
The coolest thing about the interviews that I like to do on this podcast is people that are extremely involved in space, but also have a lot more to them. So to give everyone a little bit more background on Stephen, following that stint with the United States Department of Defense, he was also a Congressional Fellow in the Department of Defense for the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy. He was an analyst in military space, missile defense, and defense innovation with the Congressional Leadership Service. He then moved to the Director of Government Relations and Regulatory at Firefly Aerospace, which I'm going to love to pick your brain about a little bit more. And as of late being today, you're the founding partner and principal of Cis Lunar International. Some other notable points that I think set Stephen apart from a lot of people in the industry Stephen was the 2023 Lobbyist of the Year from the National Institute for Lobbying and Ethics. He's a single father of two fantastic sons, one a professional soccer player now in Spain, the other one soon to follow the same footsteps. He was an Amazon best-selling author, has a permanent appointment to the Library of Congress, and in the little free time that you have, which I don't imagine there's much, Stephen is a playwright and speaker featured in the New York Times, CNN, and several other magazines. So Stephen has his toes in almost every sector of space, and then also advocacy for trying your hardest, and especially those that have similar disabilities to you.
Wow,
yeah. So, Stephen, you spent some time with the Department of Defense. You started off as the chief of these two different branches, and then you moved into a different position as a Defense Legislative Fellow as well as a Congressional Fellow. My interpretation of that is those were your initial dips into lobbying. Is that correct?
Yes. So it goes a little bit further before that. I was actually into the lobbying world with the Tourette Syndrome Association of America, where I sat on the national board. So for many years, over 10 years, actually, we would have the Trip to the Hill, where we would meet with members of Congress, meet with senior staffers, advocating for dollars to be included in the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, that supported people like me and children who were diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, a neurological disorder. So I got bit by the legislative bug during that time. I just didn't know how I would ever get there. And one day, Mr. James Dunn, he was a senior executive at Air Combat Command, he found out about the Tourette syndrome, and he found out that I had recently met with the vice president of the country of Suriname, so the Republic of Suriname, advocating for Tourette syndrome, but pretty much lobbying in their country. When he found that out, he said, "Have you ever thought about becoming a lobbyist or essentially government affairs?" I said, "Well, sir, I would love to do that. I just don't know how to get there." And within 6 months, I was approved as a congressional fellow, one of two people in the Air Force. And I went to Washington, D.C., a permanent change of station, a PCS, as a civilian. And that's where I was introduced to legislative affairs. And then within 6 months of being in legislative affairs, I was sold. I realized that my passion and my life really was to be a lobbyist. And I realized that I had already been lobbying for over a decade. I just did not realize that I was actually doing or fulfilling that skill.
So what does it mean, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but what does it mean to lobby for space? Because I would imagine at the time when you started doing this, it was not nearly the industry it is nowadays. And I would imagine it was more centered on defense space, not necessarily commercial space.
Yep. So when I first started lobbying for space, we had commercial space, but it was more on national security space, so defending space. National Security Space Launch. It used to be called EELV, Expendable EELV Launch Vehicle, but it was originally EELV program, and then it transitioned to the National Security Space Launch Program. So I had been advocating for space systems, but I started advocating first for military satellites. So MILSATCOM, military satellite communications, when I was in the Department of Defense. When I actually joined the United States Congress as a senior staffer and defense fellow, that's when I started working on legislation that supported the Air Force, eventually the Space Forces, satellite communications, also the GPS satellites, also space launch. And then when I left the government and became a full-time lobbyist for Firefly, that's when I really started advocating and lobbying for dollars to be included in the appropriations bills every year that would support Firefly in addition to commercial companies.
Got it. Okay. So a precursor to your role with Firefly Aerospace.
Yes.
So this is where I met Stephen. Stephen, I was a newbie in the space industry, going to any space event I could get my hands on in DC, and this is actually where I met. He was one of the few executives that was willing to talk to some new, fresh out of school guy that just wanted to learn more about space. Stephen at the time was an executive at Firefly and was more than happy to strike a conversation, not as a network, but as a genuine friend. And since then, I've gotten to know Stephen throughout his time at Firefly and currently at Cislunar International. So coming back to Firefly, that's one thing that I'm familiar with. We worked a lot with your Flight 5 vehicle. I'm excited for Flight 6. What did your role look like with Firefly and lobbying for a commercial company specifically with hands in both commercial payloads, NASA payloads, and defense payloads?
Yep. So Firefly was interesting. I was essentially the senior advisor in the U.S. Congress, and I had the entire space portfolio. So in Congress, I covered national security space, I covered military space, I covered missile defense, and I covered defense innovation. I was the sole person for both the House and the U.S. Senate. It's a position that only one person is appointed to, and usually we keep the position for around 35 to 40 years.
Wow.
When I joined Firefly and I resigned from this coveted role that only maybe two or three people have had in the history of our country, I joined Firefly because they not only did launch, they were going to land on the moon, and they were also going to have on orbit vehicles. They did not have a government relations program, so they asked me to come in and establish their government relations program and essentially lead their entire sector. So as I departed from Firefly, actually today, I departed as the head of government affairs. The position now is going to be the VP, the Vice President of Government Affairs, because once again, we were a new company. I had been acting in a corporate executive role since the beginning, but like I said, for international partners, head is what we use. So in that role, I actually covered both federal, state, and international. This is a very challenging part of the job because not only did I have to advocate for billions of dollars at the U.S. Capitol and the defense budget, I also had to advocate for legislation and the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the authorizers of our country. I also had to work at the state level, and thankfully, I was able to bring on somebody on the team probably around 13, 14 months ago. So he was able to cover more on the federal. I was still over the federal, but then I can branch out to the state. So I work state affairs in multiple states, and each state is different. Different lobbying rules, different challenges in each state, different processes. So I had the luxury, and I say luxury, of working both state affairs, federal affairs, and then also international affairs with Swedish Space Corporation, branching out to European customers. So yes, we covered commercial. And well, we covered commercial, and we also covered military, and all of that encapsulated into this two years I had at Firefly allowed me to launch into my own firm.
So didn't really seem like you were that busy if you're only covering every single sector of lobbying that there is to cover. Was it tricky to balance lobbying for money from the defense sector as well as NASA? Because those are obviously two different budgets. How did you manage to do that?
So NASA was a little different because the CLIPS program, the Commercial Lunar Payload Services program, which was around 255, I believe $254.3 million dollars in FY23, FY24, I think around 236, 240. That was already in there. So I didn't actually have to advocate and fight and push for that money to be there. It was already there. My job and other industry partners' job is to make sure that money stays in there. So the request for the NASA payloads or the NASA program was to remain at the enacted levels of the previous year. So for FY25, fiscal year 2025, that begins September, October timeframe, our ask at Firefly was to keep it at the same level that was enacted by Congress in 2024. In 2024, the request was to keep it at the enacted levels of FY23. So on the NASA side, I do advocate, but the biggest challenge was with tactically responsive space and other programs that we advocated for that might not have a line item, that might not have dollars, or, for example, the Department of Defense says, "Hey, TAC-RS, tactically responsive space, we only need 30 million." My job is to say, "No, DoD, Department of Defense, Space Force, you don't need 30 million. You need 50 million." And then we successfully received $50 million, so a $20 million increase in the FY24 budget. So NASA, it's not as difficult. That's more of a making sure that NASA is funded at the levels from last year, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You mentioned something in there, responsive space, which I think is one of the coolest things and what sets Firefly apart from a lot of the other commercial launch providers nowadays. No one's ever had a 24-hour turnaround on a responsive space mission like you did. I'm sure a lot of people grew a lot of gray hairs or lost all their hair doing this mission. And I'll let you give the summary, but essentially Victus Nox was a mission with Firefly Flight 3 and the U.S. Space Force where they had 24 hours to, I believe, prepare the entire vehicle and the payload and get it launched and into orbit.
So the call to the notice to launch was 24 hours, but prior to that, the payload had to get to or arrive to Firefly, and that was around a 5-day period. Millennium Space was in charge of the payload. They got it to us in around 57 hours, I believe, in the clean room, all connected. Then from there, we had 30 days. And in that 30-day period, we were waiting for a notice to launch. Once you receive that notice to launch, then you do have 24 hours to mate the payload to the payload fairing, put all the fuel in, put the payload on, encapsulate everything, roll it out to the launch pad, put the all the plugs in, etc. I am not engineer; you're the engineer. Go vertical, and all of that did have to be done in 24 hours. So we were ready before 24 hours. However, our launch window, because there is a specific bad actor that we were demonstrating that we're going to meet in the sky. That was around the 27-hour point. So that was just orbital mechanics. Why did we launch at 27 and not 24? Well, if we had launched at 24, even though we were ready, we would have missed that target, that window of opportunity. So the 27-hour point was when the target was in the correct orbit for us to launch.
I'd imagine everyone at Firefly had their different stressors, right? The mission management team, I'm sure, was running around like chickens with their head cut off. The technical team wanted to make sure the payload was integrated. What did it look like from the government relations perspective? I'd imagine the heavy lifting was prior to the mission and getting on contract to make this mission happen in the first place.
Yeah, so on the government relations side, the stressor is, of course, every single launch you want to be 100% success, mission success. Any anomalies, any delays in launch, I have to go back to Congress and report that to Congress and explain why did we just give Firefly $50 million, even though they did not give us $50 million. Why did we invest $50 million of taxpayers' money and you all did not succeed? So on the government relations side, when I was in the control room, so I was sitting on console with the headphones on for around two hours. That's the only thing I could think of is what if something goes wrong? And we have to prepare, for it's called I forgot what it's called, but if we have a contingency plan, if the rocket blows up, if the rocket doesn't launch, if the rocket launches but then doesn't make it all the way to the correct inclination or the correct orbit, all of that we have to be prepared to report back to Congress. So that is my stressor. How does the mission actually go from T minus, whether it's 4 minutes down to T minus 0 to liftoff, to MECO, main engine cutoff, all the way till we get to orbit, all the way till we get to the right, orbit where we have to deploy the payload. Once we deploy the payload, did we deploy it correctly? Did we deploy it if it's 258 kilometers? Did we deploy it at 258 kilometers? Because if it's 257 kilometers, guess what? The FAA says that's a mishap. Anything that goes wrong with that mission, I have to report back to Congress. And it's a very stressful time for government relations because I'm the one that is responsible for getting money into the budget. If we're successful, I go back to Capitol Hill with a money bag. If we're not successful, I still have to go back to Capitol Hill and I have to answer a whole bunch of questions that are very difficult.
I think another layer on top of this is Firefly did not have an extensive flight legacy, right? You only had 2 flights before this. And so I would imagine that
Two
convincing
unsuccessful.
two unsuccessful flights, I would
So the
imagine that.
first one was unsuccessful. It blew up,
Hmm.
and we blew it up because of the automated termination system, I believe it is. The second flight, we did make it to orbit, so it was a success for us. But according to the FAA, it was a mishap because we didn't. I think it was the second. You could look at the Google or look at the history.
Hmm.
We didn't complete the mission 100%, so it was not a full success. Victus Nox was our first fully successful mission where we hit every single target on the spot. So yes, it was very stressful because we were dealing with a multi-million dollar payload, a 17 or $19 million contract from the Space Force. The Space Force was there on console with us, so the customer was right there. I was with the customer looking at the rocket when it was not vertical, and they were looking at me like, Steve, we're 4 hours away from launch, the vehicle should be vertical. And thankfully, while we were there, we weren't vertical. We went vertical, and of course, the rest is history. And we were able to launch in 27 hours, which is a world record because the other record was, I think, 21 days. So we did a
Oh
very
my
successful
gosh.
mission. But it was very stressful. It was. I don't ever want to experience that again. That type of stress. It was too much, honestly.
I would imagine. And even before the whole mission, convincing the United States Congress and the Space Force that Firefly is even capable of conducting a mission like this. How do you even go about that without having the statistics and the backing behind you to point to something?
Yep. So that's the luxury of Firefly. We have many great leaders. I led the business on the business side. I led the government affairs sector, but then we also have business development led by Brett Alexander, our chief revenue officer. Prior to his arrival, we had another leader, the president of Space Transportation Services. It was our original subsidiary that I actually was hired under. Uh, the business development team did an amazing job, along with our launch team, with Adam Oakes, our VP of launch. So our business development team is the one that does the contracts. They write the proposals, they respond to RFIs, and they're the ones that submit the actual proposal to the Space Force. So once my job's over and the money ends up in legislation, then we essentially it's a race. We pass the baton over to business development, and it's their responsibility to win those dollars and convince the Space Force that Firefly is the one for the mission. And thankfully, we succeeded in convincing the Space Force that we were the ones for the mission, and we completed 100% successful.
That's awesome. And the coolest part about Firefly is you're not just doing rockets. You're also building the Blue Ghost, which is a lunar lander. You're also building Elytra Dawn, Dusk, and Dark. So Leo, Geo, and beyond Geo, lunar.
Hmm.
On top of just the launch vehicle lobbying alone, which I'd imagine is a full-time job, how do you manage to lobby for example, the NASA Eclipse program or raising money for the orbital transfer vehicle? Because they're all different multifaceted missions. They're all hard in their own respective ways. And most of the time I feel like they're not they're not crossing paths in terms of convincing people that they're worth the money.
Yep. So once again, on the congressional side, we have to work very closely with our business development team to make sure that they are advocating the Department of Defense for our technologies and our capabilities. For us, we're a small team, so we can't go into Congress asking for six, seven, eight, nine different programs.
Hmm.
We have to be laser focused. So, for example, in FY24, our main priority, number one priority, was responsive space, and we were very successful with that. But we also do advocate for the Electra, different XGO, other type of platforms or type of missions. We perform, eh, we present that to Congress, and we look for different pots of money that we might be able to get dollars increase for. But it is a big challenge. It's probably one of the biggest challenges that I had as the head of government relations because we have so many different programs at Firefly, we can't go to Congress and ask for everything. So how do we find those niches to put into specific program dollars? How can we get program increases? Maybe it's 1 million, maybe it's $5 million. We received a congressional increase in FY24 for $5 million for one of our programs, and we strategically were able to find a way to get it into a specific program, receive a $5 million increase, compete for it, and then we won the contract a few months ago or a few weeks ago for that $5 million contract. So when it comes to Elytra, when it comes to Blue Ghost, when it comes to XGO, Cislunar, etc., it's my job and our team's job to look at the legislation and look at the different line items or funding programs and say, okay, maybe this mission can go into that funding line, and maybe we can get a $5 million increase there. The TAC-RS is a bigger program. CLIPS is a bigger program.
Mm-hmm.
But the other missions, we can try to look in the intel community in their pot of money. We can look at other DoD programs, maybe Air Force Research Lab, maybe Defense Innovation Unit. Like, where can we find programs or pots of money that we can say, hey, DoD, if you receive $10 million extra, would this technology benefit you? And if the Space Force says yes, then I can take that back to Congress and say, I spoke to the Space Force, and for an additional $10 million, we could beat China. And then the Space Force says yes, Congress says yes, the committee says yes, the congressperson says yes, all of Congress says yes. Then they give us a $5 million increase in a program. And then we have to go through the whole, the RFI request. And then we will get those dollars, or somebody would get those dollars to defeat China or deter China as trying to take over space. It's a very complicated process.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And you've been doing this for over 2 decades and counting, which led you to enough experience to embark on a new journey, live in Spain, and start Cislunar International as of today. Yourself and your partner,
Yes.
Sam Peterson. Do you mind telling everybody about what Cislunar International is?
Yes. So, Cislunar International, it's a global advocacy firm. We look at not only advocacy efforts, so we try not to use the word lobbying, but
Mm-hmm.
essentially, I am a federal lobbyist. I am also a lobbyist at the state level in a few states, and I want to expand my skill set more to European affairs because I see a great opportunity for European space launch with Firefly launching from Sweden in 2026, I believe. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
2026 from S range. There's going to be the first U.S. commercial company launching from Europe ever. So, with that being said, there are customers that are in Europe, even on the regulatory and on the parliamentary side. I saw that there's an opportunity where space, I believe, is going to really explode, not in a bad way, but explode in Europe, where you're going to need people in Europe who understand space launch, who understand overall national security space, and understand the U.S. economy, the U.S. government, and I'll be that essentially that bridge to Europe. So for U.S. companies, we are that bridge over to Europe. If you want to gain European business or European access, especially at the EU, the European Union, or the UN. And then also for European companies, what I'm finding out is Cislunar International is also a bridge back to the U.S. economy. So some companies in Europe have reached out asking if we can support economic development. We want to expand and have roots in America. We don't know how to get there. You do. So I'm helping these companies with economic development, who to reach out to in the U.S., what states to consider, and really helping them mold their strategy into how to become a U.S. Based company. At the end of the day, we are strategists, we are advocates, but we're a global strategy and advocacy firm. We are growing. We are up to almost 2 clients as of today, and we just opened
All
our
right.
doors. We opened our doors a soft launch. The LLC was formed, but
Mm-hmm.
today is my official last day at Firefly. However, I did sign the contract with the company today. as their senior advisor for government affairs, effective August 16th, 2024. So Cislunar International is 100% open for business. We are making the final or the official announcement that we're opening our doors September 1st. That's when our contracts, a big contract that we just signed, or we will be signing in 2 weeks. That's when that starts. So yes, that's who Cislunar International is. I am based in the Madrid, Spain area. That's where our headquarters is, right near Atocha train station. So Atocha in Madrid is the center where all Europe comes to Spain, Spain and Madrid. So my office is around 2 minutes away from there. And then we also have a location in Texas with my business partner Sam. So he'll be covering the southern states, and then also U.S. operations. And then we will be hiring a DC associate slash hopefully grow to be a partner, chief of staff, executive person in the next 6 months, potentially earlier. And they will cover DC operations because right now I'm covering it. But like I said, it's booming in Europe. And I need to focus all of my attention eventually only on the European affairs of space.
It's an exciting time, and it is crazy how much space in Europe is blowing up. So kudos to you for having some foresight on that one.
Oh, thank you.
I
It
think,
definitely was scary making the jump with no business.
yeah, and just beyond the business, starting from working in DC with a large aerospace company, then moving to Spain so your sons can pursue their dreams as being professional soccer players, and starting a new business all at the same time. So huge life switch right there. How has Spain been?
Spain has been amazing. I love it. I love living in Europe. I'm European at heart. I lived in Europe as a teenager, so I've been wanting to get back home for decades. So living in Spain, easy access to rail, easy access to planes. I love the people. I love the food. Just everything about Spain is amazing. One reason I did step down from my corporate executive role is because of the long hours. I tell many people that my family is first. Cislunar is not first. I will tell every single client that. My first priority, their names are Santiago and Julian. They are my kids and they are my first priority. So living in Spain as now the founding partner principal at Cislunar International, I no longer have a boss. I am the CEO, essentially. I am the C-suite of the firm. So with that being said, I don't report to anybody. It's nice because if I want to go get coffee, I go get coffee. If there's a trip that I need to take but I don't want to take, I don't take it. The clients I don't work for, I support. I provide services to each client. There is not one single client that is my boss. I am no longer an
Mm-hmm.
employee. Literally, I own a firm. Or I co-own a firm, a global firm that will be a multi-million dollar firm probably by December. It's crazy because we're growing very fast. So
That's
with that being
awesome.
said, I love Spain. I would love to let the world know I am not working 100 hours a week or 80 hours a week anymore. I am very good at my skill set. I am very good. I'm the best at lobbying that anybody, I mean, I know other people. I run circles around everybody. So with that being said, while they're working 100 hours a week, I am not going to be working 100 hours a week. I will not disclose how many hours I'm working. It's nowhere near 100. And we do that specifically. I can grow. We can sign 10 clients right now and go, make millions and grow the firm and work 100 hours a week. But there is a limit of what I'm willing to do, and my family has to always be the priority. So once we reach a certain amount of clients, we will bring on a new hire, a new associate. And then when we reach another level, we'll bring on another associate. So we will grow and expand. But the ultimate goal is not for one person to have 15 clients in their portfolio because we want to
Mm-hmm.
give quality, not quantity.
So one of the most inspiring things that I've learned about Steven is on top of being, like I said, the best lobbyist specific for space and other categories in the world, quite frankly, he also has a priority of A, his family, his two sons, and making sure that others who may suffer similar disabilities to Stephen, such as Tourette's, ADHD, ADD, OCD, also understand that these opportunities to become as successful as Stephen exist for them out there. For all those that are going to be listening that may have had a similar childhood to you or have had similar obstacles in their life, what is one piece of advice that you have for them to someday reach a point where you are now?
Yeah, so I would say that you have to believe in your dreams. I don't allow other people to believe in my own dreams. And I say that because my dreams are for me. So it's very difficult to expect other people to believe in a dream that is not meant to be for them. So I would say, whatever your dreams are, go after it. Don't listen to others. If somebody says that's impossible, or you shouldn't do that, or that's not the right time, I would say live your life according to what your dreams are. Leap out the boat, step out on faith, believe the process. I had a family member say I should have around $300,000 saved up before moving to Spain and before starting Sicilian International, and I should stay at Firefly. And this individual, encouraged me multiple times, essentially that I'm making a mistake leaving Firefly with almost no money. Um, I appreciated their concern. I listened to their advice, but at the end of the day, it's not their dream. My dream was to be a father. My dream was to support my children. If that meant we had to live in a studio apartment in Spain, then we would live in the studio apartment. But my kids come first. That was my dream. My second dream was to own my own company. And guess what? Now I do.
Now you're
I
there.
co-own. Yeah, I co-own a global advocacy firm. So for those looking to start businesses, those looking to go to med school, law school, maybe you want to be an aeronautical engineer, maybe you want to be a playwright, maybe you want to go Broadway, like I've been able to. I've been honored to go to off be an off Broadway producer. Whatever it is, I just say live your dream. And my trademark is unlock the impossible. So many times, our dreams are right in front of us, but it's in a box, like a treasure chest. And everybody, Brendan, convinces us that they have the key, or somebody else has a key, or you have to go through 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. And then once you reach that 30-year point, then you get access to that key. You go to this impossible, you unlock it, and then it becomes possible. I don't believe that. I
Hmm.
believe you right now, you already have the keys. I already have the key. So everybody listening, you're the one with the key, and the impossible that everybody says is impossible, it's impossible because you won't take the key out your pocket and nobody's holding it for you. You have the key in your pocket, and right in front of you, there's a box. Unlock the impossible, and once it opens up, you realize I can become an engineer. I can become a playwright. I can become a business owner. I can be a father of two with no spouse through international adoption. I can move to Spain. I can start a firm. I can. And while you're trying to do the I can and unlock the impossible, everybody else is going to try to close that treasure chest and tell you it's impossible, but stick to it. And that's why I would encourage young people, old people, or more mature people. It's never too late to unlock the impossible and live your dreams. And that's what I'm doing. That's what my son Santiago's doing, playing pro here. That is what my younger son Julian's doing. There are no limitations for the McCall family, and my boys are not limited. They said they wanted to move to Spain and play soccer. I quit my job, and that is a fact. I quit my job. Annual salary compensation and annual bonus was around $500,000 a year. I walked away from $500,000 to make zero, because as of 24 hours ago, when I did not have a contract signed, today literally was the day I was going from $500,000 down to $0 income, unemployed. And I lived in Spain right now, knowing I was going from $500,000, a $500,000, down to zero. But I believed in the impossible being unlocked. And I moved here with no idea how I was going to feed my kids. And literally last night, I signed a contract. The client signed a contract, and effective this morning at midnight, there's a certain amount of money that I'm getting per month as a retainer to support this client. And there's another one coming September 1st. And now already by December, I'll be more comfortable than I was working at an industry partner. I'll just say that. And working less hours.
Stephen is a testament to following your dreams and is an enabler to everybody around my age, older, younger, to do the same. Stephen, I can't thank you enough for A, coming on this podcast, and B, being such an awesome friend and mentor throughout my time in the industry and moving forward. I look forward to having more chats with you in the near future and maybe even a little visit to Spain.
Yes, definitely visit Spain.
Awesome. And for everyone that wants to learn a little bit more about Stephen, I'm going to link all his information in the show notes of this episode, as well as Cis Lunar International. You can find all those links there. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love if you can give it a 5-star rating and review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever podcast player you prefer. Stephen, thanks again for coming on, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you, Brendan. Great chatting with you.